Well, as you just heard PIMCO's Paul McCulley say, Ben Bernanke made a strong case for his handling of the financial crisis in a speech in Jackson Hole, Wyoming on Friday. Our Kathleen Hayes was there. She joins us now, and she has a special guest who's not so sure that Mr. Bernanke should be patting himself on the back. Kathleen?
Thank you so much, Mark. Our next guest has been warning for several years now the financial system was on the wrong track. In The Road to Financial Reformation, he spells out what caused the financial crisis and what we must do to prevent another one. Henry Kaufman, president of Henry Kaufman and Company, joins us now. Welcome.
Thank you.
So we were just referencing and running that quote from Paul McCulley of PIMCO, really saying, yes, the Fed, as Ben Bernanke said in his speech on Friday, did the right thing, got us out of the financial crisis, has basically gotten us back on track. So as we just said, is it time for Mr. Bernanke to pat himself on the back?
Well, it seems to me that the Federal Reserve has changed its role from villain to hero. I believe that we've tended to forget the villain part, and now the Fed is considered a hero. But it also ought to be recognized that a good part of the problems that have occurred have been due to faulty monetary policy. And unfortunately, we have not had either a symposium or a commission that is going to really review what went right or what went wrong with monetary policy leading up to this crisis.
Well, in your book, Henry, we just were showing the picture of financial reformation, and you talk about warnings. But in this book, you talk about the perils of monetary gradualism. Now, we came to believe that gradualism, moving rates slowly, as Alan Greenspan did, was a good thing. You don't upset the markets, you telegraph what you're going to do. How did this contribute to the financial crisis?
Well, the policy of gradualism really has contributed to the crisis in a number of ways. It continued to promote very rapid growth of debt. It allowed financial institutions to leverage in massive amounts, and those massive amounts of leveraging contributed to a very significant increase in the debt of households and in the debt of business corporations, and therefore the credit quality of both of those deteriorated, and that in turn backed into a very weakened group of financial institutions.
Now, you also talk in the book about how the failure of financial oversight contributed to the crisis. Now, there's a lot of overseers, but certainly the Federal Reserve is one of the main overseers of the banks.
Well, you just said a number of things. For example, there are many overseers. We have had many overseers. But the principal overseer has always been the Federal Reserve System. And the Federal Reserve System has been regarded as the guardian of our financial system. And it did not play the role of a guardian. A guardian, from my perspective, is somewhat like a parent. A parent holds children responsible to a set of standards and forces them to adhere to a set of standards. The Federal Reserve didn't do that.
Well, parents need to set good rules. And if they change the rules and make them too lax, their kids have parties, when they go on vacation and they're not there. Do we need a stricter parent? For example, do we need something more like Glass-Steagall, which was abolished in 1998, which separated banks and investment banks, commercial banks, that is, so they couldn't take the risky activities on the commercial side?
As you just indicated, the Glass-Steagall Act, in fading away into oblivion, was accepted by the Federal Reserve. It did not recognize the consequences of the removal of the Glass-Steagall Act. Now, there's nothing perfect in the relationship of a parent to a child, and there's nothing perfect in the relationship between an official supervisor and a financial system. But the role of that supervisor is to hone that responsibility, even within those imperfections. And we just went the other way.
So let's talk about some of the things we need to do now. Alan Greenspan, for the longest time, when he was Fed chairman, said, you can't prick bubbles with Fed policy because you can't see them in advance. But recently, there's been some notable changing in that view. Janet Yellen, San Francisco Fed Bank president, gave a speech a few months ago where she said that has to be revisited. Does the Fed need a policy that tells us when a bubble is developing and when it's time to deflate it?
We need a central supervisor, and that should be the Federal Reserve, in a restructured fashion from what it is today. And that supervisor has to set guidelines on the degree of leverage, number one, on the extent to which trading activity should be in proprietary accounts of various financial institutions. That should say something about the responsibility of those who securitize debt, whether they have an ongoing responsibility in monitoring and if they have a stake in that debt. We have none of that at the present time. I have to say, I think in light of the events that are transpiring now, the fervor to restructure the financial system, the fervor to improve supervision, I think probably is in the process of lessening. Markets are being stabilized. In fact, the current environment encourages, again, the things that we've seen in the past. Stock prices are going up. Commodity prices are going up against a background of declining interest rates. As such. And there is the foundation here to encourage the growth of financial asset values, and I believe the Fed's going to have a very difficult time of re-entering into a more normalized period.
Do the banks continue to have too much power or so much power through their bigness and through their connections in Washington that that's what's going to keep real financial reform at bay?
Well, one of the overarching issues that confronts supervision and re-regulation is how should large financial institutions be dealt with? How should they be managed? My view, as I expressed in the book, is that large financial institutions either become financial supervisory institutions in very strict form, or they have to be taken apart.
Okay. Well, Henry, I want to continue this conversation. So you want to find out more about the road to financial reformation. Also, Henry Kaufman's been an economist for a long time. Where does he see us in this cycle of recession to recovery? That's all coming up next. We're back with Henry Kaufman, president of Henry Kaufman & Co., talking about his new book, Financial Reformation, The Road to Financial Reformation. And that's the question. Are we on the road to financial reformation, Henry? How important is this question, for example, of financial supervision?
Earlier this year, I thought we would be well on the road to financial reformation. But the economy seems to be stabilizing. Conditions in the financial markets are improving somewhat. And considering the difficulty that the administration has with the health program, I think the chances of significant re-regulation have diminished somewhat. But it is the critical issue that will establish either improved economic conditions for an extended period of time or a return to continued volatility and serious problems. And this is an issue that requires the most important attention that we have today by this administration. And so far, I haven't seen a dramatic thrust to overcome already the problems that seem to be surfacing in doing an effective job.
You know, there's been a lot of written about the coziness or the closeness of some top officials in Barack Obama's administration to Wall Street. You know, Larry Summers worked for a hedge fund. Tim Geithner, while he was Treasury Secretary, according to the New York Times, was offered a job as the head of Citigroup by Sandy Weill. Now, none of those things are wrong. I mean, they're perfectly legitimate, upright activities. But do you sense just a little bit too much identification with Wall Street and the banks among some top officials?
Well, that's difficult to really do in an analytical form. It depends on the integrity of the individuals involved. After all, Bill Martin, who was one of the great chairmen of the Federal Reserve Board in the first 50 in the 50s and in the 1960s, had been chairman of the New York Stock Exchange at one time. So I don't think I can venture an objective view on it.
Quick final question. Are we in recovery? Has the recession ended?
The recession has ended, but I think, and I believe, we will have here a run-up in economic activity, partly due to inventorying, improved production, but the backbone of the American economy is going to rest on consumption and capital spending by business. And we have not yet seen that fully. The fact is that so far, private credit growth, the debt of households and of business, is not really rising. The only thing that is supporting the push is the increase in governmental debt.
Okay. So, cautiously optimistic, and again, maybe a little more emphasis on the caution. Henry Kaufman, thank you so much. The book, The Road to Financial Reformation. Thanks for discussing it with us today. Mark, I'm sending it back to you.
Kathleen, thanks.